I watched in disbelief as the tow truck lifted Sheriff Karen's patrol car onto its bed, right next to the massive dumpster that had been blocking my driveway for 2 weeks. Her face turned 3 shades of red as she stormed across the street, badge gleaming in the afternoon sun, her hand already reaching for her radio to call for backup. But what she did not know was that I had been planning this moment for days, documenting every illegal move she had made, every abuse of power she thought nobody would challenge. And that is when I realized, sometimes the only way to beat a corrupt cop is to use their own system against them. My name is David, and I had lived on Maple Street for 8 years without a single problem. Every morning, I would pull out of my driveway at 7:30 sharp, coffee in hand, ready to face another day at the insurance office downtown. The neighbors waved from their porches, kids rode bikes on the sidewalks, and old Mrs. Henderson always had her garden looking like something out of a magazine. It was the kind of neighborhood where people still left their doors unlocked and borrowed sugar from each other. I loved coming home each evening, pulling into my own driveway and knowing that this little slice of suburbia was mine. The driveway itself was nothing special, just a simple concrete strip that led to my garage, but it represented everything I had worked for: independence, security, peace of mind. Sheriff Karen Martinez first appeared in our neighborhood about 6 months ago. She was new to the department, transferred from some bigger city up north, and she seemed determined to make her presence known. At first, I thought it was just thorough police work. She would cruise slowly down our street during her patrol, sometimes stopping to chat with residents about neighborhood watch programs or remind people about parking regulations. Our first interaction was completely harmless. I was washing my car in the driveway on a Saturday afternoon when she pulled up in her patrol car and rolled down the window. "Nice day for car washing," she said with what seemed like a genuine smile. "Yes, ma'am, perfect weather for it," I replied, still scrubbing the hood with my sponge. "You know, there are city ordinances about washing cars in driveways. Something about soap runoff and environmental protection." I stopped scrubbing and looked at her more carefully. Her smile had not changed, but something about her tone felt different, calculating. "I was not aware of any such ordinance," I said politely. "I have been washing my car here for years." "Well, now you know," she said, that same smile never wavering. "Just something to keep in mind for next time." She drove away without another word, leaving me standing there with a wet sponge in my hand and an uncomfortable feeling in my chest. Something about the interaction felt wrong, but I could not put my finger on what exactly bothered me. Maybe it was the way she had delivered information that sounded official but felt like a threat. Or maybe it was how she seemed to be testing me, seeing how I would react to her authority. Over the next few weeks, Sheriff Karen became a regular fixture on our street, not just during normal patrol hours, but at odd times that made no sense for routine police work. I would see her parked at the corner at 6 in the morning, watching residents leave for work. She would cruise by during lunch hours when most people were away, and I started noticing her patrol car sitting under the streetlight late at night. The car washing incident was just the beginning. 2 weeks later, she knocked on my door at 8 in the evening, claiming she had received a noise complaint about my lawnmower. "You were mowing your grass at 7:30 this morning," she said, consulting a small notebook like she was conducting a serious investigation. "The city noise ordinance prohibits lawn maintenance before 8 a.m. on weekdays." I stared at her in confusion. I have been mowing at 7:30 for years. None of my neighbors have ever complained. "Well, someone complained today," she said firmly. "I am here to make sure it does not happen again." Behind her stood Deputy Williams, a young officer who looked like he would rather be anywhere else. He avoided eye contact and kept shifting his weight from foot to foot, clearly uncomfortable with whatever game his superior was playing. "Can I ask who made the complaint?" I asked. "That information is confidential," Karen replied, her tone growing colder. "But I am sure you understand that we take quality of life issues very seriously in this community." The way she said, "we" made it clear that I was not part of whatever community she was protecting. I was the problem that needed to be managed. After they left, I called my neighbor Tom, whose house shared a fence line with my backyard. If anyone would be bothered by early morning mowing, it would be him. "Noise complaint," Tom laughed when I explained the visit. "David, I am up at 6 every morning for my run. Your mower never bothered me. Hell, most of us are awake by then anyway." I called 2 other neighbors and got the same response. Nobody had complained about anything. Karen had either made up the complaint entirely or was manufacturing problems where none existed. But why? What was the point of harassing a law-abiding citizen over imaginary infractions? The answer became clear during her next visit. I was coming home from work on a Thursday afternoon when I found her standing in my driveway, taking pictures of my car with her phone. "Is there a problem, Sheriff?" I asked, trying to keep my voice calm. "Your vehicle registration sticker appears to be expired," she said, without looking up from her phone. I walked over and checked my license plate. The sticker was clearly visible and would not expire for another 4 months. "The registration is current," I said, pointing to the date. She squinted at the sticker, then made a note in her little book. "I will need to verify that with the DMV. In the meantime, I would recommend not driving this vehicle until we can confirm the registration status." You cannot seriously expect me to stop driving my legally registered car because you misread a date. For the first time, her professional mask slipped completely. Her eyes narrowed and she stepped closer, using her height and uniform to create an intimidating presence. "I expect you to follow lawful orders from a peace officer," she said quietly, "and I expect you to show proper respect for the badge." That night I realized what was happening. This was not about car washing or lawn mowing or registration stickers. This was about power. Sheriff Karen was testing how far she could push, how much authority she could assert over someone who had done nothing wrong. And if I did not push back soon, the harassment would only get worse. I should have seen it coming. After weeks of petty harassment and manufactured violations, Sheriff Karen was ready to escalate to something that would truly disrupt my life. But when I pulled onto Maple Street after work on a Monday evening and saw the massive construction dumpster sitting squarely across my driveway, I was still shocked by the audacity of it. The thing was enormous, one of those 30-yard containers that construction crews use for major demolitions. It sat there like a green metal mountain, completely blocking access to my garage and extending several feet into the street. I had to park 3 blocks away and walk home, carrying my briefcase and lunch bag like some kind of displaced refugee in my own neighborhood. Mrs. Henderson was watering her flowers when I walked up to survey the obstacle. "That appeared around noon," she said, shaking her head sympathetically. "Big truck dropped it off and left without saying a word to anyone." "Did you see who ordered it?" I asked, though I already suspected the answer. "Sheriff Martinez was here when it arrived. She was directing the truck driver, telling him exactly where to place it." I walked around the dumpster, looking for any kind of identification or permit number. There was a company name on the side, Municipal Waste Solutions, but no work order or official paperwork visible anywhere. This was not some accidental delivery or bureaucratic mix-up. This was a deliberate act of harassment disguised as official business. I called the waste management company immediately. We received a request from the sheriff's department for a temporary placement, the dispatcher explained. Something about a public safety hazard that needed immediate attention. What kind of public safety hazard? The work order says debris removal and code enforcement action. You will need to contact the sheriff's department for more details. Of course I would. Karen had created a perfect bureaucratic circle that led right back to her office. I was trapped in a system where the person causing the problem was also the only person with authority to solve it. I drove to the sheriff's station the next morning, taking time off work that I could not afford to lose. Karen was sitting behind the front desk, wearing that same calculated smile I had come to despise. "Mr. Peterson," she said before I could even speak, "I was wondering when you would stop by. I want to know why there is a dumpster blocking my driveway." "Public safety concern," she replied, consulting a folder on her desk. "We received reports of hazardous materials being stored on your property. The dumpster is there to facilitate proper disposal once our investigation is complete." "What hazardous materials? I do not have any hazardous materials." She looked up at me with mock concern. "Well, that is what the investigation will determine. These things take time, you understand. Could be weeks before we get the environmental team out there to do proper testing. You cannot just block someone's driveway based on anonymous reports." "I can and I did," she said, her smile finally disappearing. "And if you continue to interfere with an ongoing investigation, you might find yourself facing more serious charges." I left the station angrier than I had ever been in my adult life. Karen was not just abusing her authority anymore. She was actively destroying my ability to function as a normal citizen. I could not park in my own driveway, could not access my garage, could not even have packages delivered to my house. And there was apparently nothing I could do about it through official channels. That evening, I sat on my front porch staring at the dumpster and trying to figure out my next move. Tom from next door came over with 2 beers and sat down beside me. "This is insane," he said, shaking his head. "She cannot just park a dumpster on your property and call it law enforcement." "Apparently she can," I replied bitterly. "The whole system is designed to protect people like her." "So what are you going to do?" I looked at that green metal obstacle blocking my driveway, thinking about all the ways Karen had abused her position, all the petty harassment and manufactured violations. The system had failed me completely. Maybe it was time to stop playing by rules that only applied to people without badges. "I am going to fight back," I said quietly, "but I am going to do it smart." Living without access to your own driveway sounds like a minor inconvenience until you actually have to do it. Every morning became a logistical nightmare. I had to leave for work 20 minutes early just to walk 3 blocks to wherever I had managed to find street parking the night before. Grocery shopping turned into an endurance test, carrying bags of food that same 3 blocks while trying not to drop anything. The real breaking point came on Thursday morning when I had to meet an important client for breakfast. I had laid out my best suit the night before, set my alarm early, and planned every detail of the morning routine. But when I got to my car, I discovered that someone had broken the passenger window during the night. Glass covered the front seat, and rain from an overnight storm had soaked the interior. I called my client to reschedule, called the insurance company to report the vandalism, and called my boss to explain why I would be late for the 3rd time that week. By the time I got to work, I was exhausted and humiliated, and I had not even accomplished anything productive. That afternoon, I started making phone calls. I contacted the city council, the mayor's office, and the state police. Each conversation followed the same frustrating pattern. Everyone was very sympathetic, very concerned, and completely powerless to help. Sheriff Martinez is an elected official, the city attorney explained patiently. We cannot interfere with her law enforcement activities without evidence of criminal wrongdoing. Blocking someone's driveway with a dumpster for 2 weeks is not criminal wrongdoing. If she says it is part of an ongoing investigation, then we have to respect her professional judgment. The state police were equally useless. Sounds like a local matter, the sergeant told me. You should work with your local authorities to resolve this. My local authority was the problem. Karen had created a perfect system where she could harass citizens with complete impunity, hiding behind badges and bureaucracy while destroying people's lives one petty violation at a time. That evening, I decided to do some research of my own. I spent 3 hours online, looking up property law, municipal codes, and civil rights violations. What I found was both encouraging and infuriating. Karen was breaking multiple laws with her dumpster blockade, but enforcing those laws would require filing lawsuits that could take months or years to resolve. I also started researching Karen herself. Public records showed that she had been transferred from her previous department after administrative issues that were never clearly explained. There were mentions of citizen complaints and internal investigations, but nothing specific enough to build a case on. But then I found something interesting. 3 months ago, Karen had received 2 parking tickets for leaving her personal vehicle in a handicapped space outside the grocery store. The tickets had been dismissed, of course, but the record was still there in the city database. I kept digging. Karen lived in an apartment complex on the other side of town, and according to property records, she had been cited twice for violating parking restrictions in her own complex. Again, the citations had mysteriously disappeared, but the original reports were still filed in the system. A pattern was emerging. Karen routinely ignored parking laws and property regulations when they applied to her, but she used those same laws as weapons against citizens she wanted to harass. She was a hypocrite and a bully, drunk on power, and convinced that her badge made her untouchable. As I sat there reading through months of records, a plan started forming in my mind. Karen had made one crucial mistake in her campaign of harassment. She had assumed that I would play by the rules even when she refused to follow them herself. She had counted on my respect for law and order to keep me from fighting back effectively. But respect is a two-way street. If Karen wanted to abuse the system, then maybe it was time for the system to bite back. I started making a different kind of phone call, this time to towing companies and legal services. If Karen thought she could park wherever she wanted and ignore property laws, she was about to learn a very expensive lesson. Bricks Part 5, Strategic Planning. Target word count, 600. I have never considered myself a vindictive person, but 2 weeks of sleeping poorly and walking 3 blocks to my car every morning had changed my perspective on justice. If the system would not protect me from Karen's abuse of power, then I would have to create my own justice, using the same laws she was violating. My first call was to Martinez Towing, a family-owned company that had been serving our county for 20 years. The owner, Elena Martinez, was no relation to Sheriff Karen despite sharing the same last name. When I explained my situation, she was immediately sympathetic. "We have had problems with her before," Elena admitted. "She thinks her badge means she can park anywhere she wants and we cannot touch her vehicle." What if she was parked illegally on private property? Same rules apply to everyone, Alina said firmly. Badge or no badge, if you are blocking someone's driveway or parked on private property without permission, we can tow you. Even a police vehicle. Especially a police vehicle. Cops are supposed to set an example, not break the law. I spent the next several days documenting Karen's routine. She was remarkably predictable in her habits, always parking in the same spots around town, always staying longer than posted time limits, always assuming that her uniform gave her special privileges. The breakthrough came when I discovered that she regularly parked her personal vehicle in the fire lane outside the post office while conducting what she called official business. The post office manager confirmed that they had asked her multiple times to move her car, but she always ignored their requests. She says she is responding to police matters, the manager told me, but she is usually just picking up her personal mail or chatting with the clerks about non-work stuff. I also learned that Karen had been parking her patrol car in front of fire hydrants during her lunch breaks at various restaurants around town. The fire department was aware of the problem, but had been reluctant to take action against a law enforcement officer. We have to work with these people, the fire chief explained. It creates problems if we start writing tickets for cops. But the most useful information came from Karen's own apartment complex. The property manager, a woman named Sarah Chen, was frustrated with Karen's consistent violation of assigned parking rules. She parks in visitor spaces, handicapped spaces, even the fire lane, Sarah told me over coffee. The other tenants complain constantly, but when we try to enforce the rules, she tells us she is exempt because of her job. Have you ever had her car towed? We have been afraid to. She threatened to have our towing contract revoked if we touched her vehicle. This was exactly the pattern I had expected to find. Karen used her authority to intimidate anyone who tried to hold her accountable for basic rules that applied to everyone else. She had created a bubble of impunity around herself, confident that nobody would have the courage or resources to challenge her. But Karen had made two critical mistakes. First, she had targeted someone with enough education and free time to research the law thoroughly. Second, she had been so blatant in her own violations that building a case against her would be relatively easy. I spent one more week documenting her illegal parking habits, taking time-stamped photos, and collecting witness statements from frustrated business owners and residents. By Friday afternoon, I had enough evidence to bury her in citations if I wanted to be petty about it. But I was not interested in being petty. I wanted justice that fit the crime. Karen had blocked my driveway for 2 weeks with an illegally placed dumpster. It was time for her to experience the same inconvenience she had inflicted on me. Friday morning arrived with perfect weather and perfect timing. I had been monitoring Karen's schedule for 2 weeks, and she was nothing if not predictable. Every Friday at 10 a.m., she parked her patrol car in the fire lane outside the post office to pick up mail and chat with the postal workers. She typically stayed for 20 to 30 minutes, long enough for what I had planned. At 9:45, I positioned myself across the street with a clear view of the post office. Elena Martinez was parked around the corner in her tow truck, waiting for my signal. We had rehearsed this moment several times, making sure we understood exactly what needed to happen and when. Karen arrived right on schedule, pulling into the fire lane with the casual arrogance I had come to expect. She sat in her car for a few minutes, probably finishing a phone call or updating her paperwork, then climbed out and walked into the post office like she owned the building. I waited exactly 5 minutes to make sure she would be inside long enough, then sent Alina the text message. Go now. The tow truck rounded the corner and backed up to Karen's patrol car with professional efficiency. Alina had all the necessary paperwork ready: photos of the illegal parking, documentation of the fire lane violation, and a property owner's authorization from the post office manager who had finally agreed to take action. As Alina was securing the patrol car to her truck, I walked over to the dumpster that had been blocking my driveway for 16 days. My second tow truck, operated by a company called Metro Recovery, was already in position. I had spent considerable time explaining the situation to their dispatcher, providing documentation that the dumpster had been placed without proper permits and was blocking access to private property. "You sure about this?" the driver asked as he prepared to lift the massive container. "I am sure," I replied, holding up the stack of paperwork I had prepared. "That dumpster was placed illegally and has been blocking my driveway for over 2 weeks. The company that delivered it confirmed they have no valid work order for this location." Both towing operations proceeded smoothly. Alina finished securing the patrol car just as Metro Recovery was lifting the dumpster onto their truck. The timing was absolutely perfect. 2 vehicles that had been used to harass and intimidate me were being removed simultaneously by the same legal process that Karen had ignored when it applied to her own behavior. I was standing on my front porch, watching the dumpster finally disappear from my driveway, when Karen came storming out of the post office. Her face went through several distinct color changes as she processed what she was seeing. First confusion, then disbelief, then pure rage. "What the hell is going on here?" she shouted, running toward Alina's tow truck. "Your vehicle was parked illegally in a fire lane," Alina replied calmly, not even pausing in her work. "Property owner requested removal." "I am a police officer. You cannot tow a police vehicle." "Ma'am, I can tow any vehicle that is parked illegally, regardless of who owns it. Your badge does not exempt you from parking laws." Karen's face was now bright red, and she was fumbling for her radio to call for backup. But before she could get through to dispatch, she noticed the second tow truck pulling away with the dumpster that had been her primary weapon against me. "Stop!" she screamed, running into the middle of the street. "That is evidence in an ongoing investigation." The Metro Recovery driver paused and looked at her with professional politeness. "Ma'am, do you have a court order or warrant authorizing this container to be placed on private property?" Karen opened and closed her mouth several times, clearly struggling to come up with an answer that would not expose her own illegal behavior. There are environmental concerns, public safety," she stammered. "Without proper paperwork, this is just an illegally dumped container," the driver said. "We have authorization from the property owner to remove it." As both tow trucks drove away, Karen stood in the middle of the street looking like someone had just stolen her favorite toy. Her patrol car was gone, her primary harassment tool was gone, and for the first time in months, she was the one dealing with consequences instead of imposing them on others. The look on her face was worth every minute I had spent planning this moment. The first phone call came 30 minutes after the tow trucks disappeared. Karen had managed to get another deputy to drive her back to the station, and she was apparently making demands that everyone from the mayor to the governor intervene on her behalf. "This is harassment," she shouted into her phone loud enough that I could hear her from across the street. "This citizen is interfering with police operations." But when the dust settled and the officials started making their own phone calls, a very different picture emerged. The post office manager confirmed that Karen regularly violated parking regulations, despite multiple requests to move her vehicle. The fire department admitted they had been documenting her illegal parking for months, but had been afraid to take action. Most damaging of all, the waste management company that had delivered the dumpster could not produce any legitimate work order or environmental permit justifying its placement on my property. When pressed by city officials, they admitted that Karen had simply called and requested the delivery without following proper procedures or providing necessary documentation. By Tuesday morning, I was getting calls from other residents who had experienced similar harassment from Karen, but had been afraid to speak up. Mrs. Patterson from Oak Street had been cited 3 times for excessive holiday decorations that violated no actual city ordinance. Mr. Rodriguez had been threatened with arrest for working on his car in his own driveway, supposedly violating a non-existent noise regulation. She told me that if I complained to anyone, she would find reasons to arrest my teenage son, Mrs. Patterson explained during one particularly emotional phone call. I was too scared to say anything, but when I heard what you did, I realized that staying silent was not protecting my family. The local newspaper picked up the story on Wednesday. The headline read, "Sheriff accused of harassment campaign against local residents." The article was carefully neutral in its language, but it included quotes from multiple victims and raised serious questions about Karen's abuse of authority. Karen's response to the media attention was typically tone-deaf. She held an impromptu press conference where she accused me of orchestrating a coordinated attack on law enforcement and claimed that her actions were all part of legitimate police work. Mr. Peterson has been under investigation for environmental violations and code enforcement issues, she told the 3 reporters who bothered to show up. His vindictive behavior shows exactly why we needed to take action. When reporters asked her to produce evidence of these alleged violations, she could only repeat vague claims about ongoing investigations and public safety concerns. It was clear to everyone watching that she had no legitimate justification for any of her actions. The breaking point came when the county sheriff, Karen's direct supervisor, announced that he was launching a formal investigation into her conduct. Sheriff Williams was a respected veteran with 30 years of experience, and he had apparently been receiving complaints about Karen for months. "We take allegations of abuse of authority very seriously," he said in a written statement. "All citizens deserve to be treated fairly and respectfully by law enforcement, regardless of any personal conflicts that may arise." By Friday, exactly 1 week after the towing incident, Karen had been placed on administrative leave pending the outcome of the investigation. Her badge and service weapon were temporarily confiscated, and she was prohibited from exercising any police authority until the matter was resolved. I was finally able to park in my own driveway again, a simple pleasure that I had not fully appreciated until it was taken away. But more importantly, other residents were starting to come forward with their own stories of harassment and intimidation. What had started as a personal conflict was becoming a community-wide reckoning with the abuse of police power. For the first time in months, I felt like justice was actually possible. The formal investigation took 6 weeks to complete, but the outcome was everything I had hoped for and more. Sheriff Williams conducted a thorough review that included interviews with dozens of residents, business owners, and city officials. The pattern of harassment and abuse that emerged was far worse than I had initially realized. Karen had been systematically targeting anyone who questioned her authority or failed to show what she considered adequate respect. She had manufactured violations, threatened arrests without cause, and used her position to intimidate citizens into silence. The environmental investigation that supposedly justified blocking my driveway had never existed. The hazardous materials reports were completely fabricated. Most shocking of all, the investigation revealed that Karen had been selling seized property through unofficial channels and pocketing the profits. Items that should have been returned to their owners or processed through official evidence procedures were being sold at flea markets and online auctions. She had turned her badge into a personal profit center while terrorizing the community she was supposed to serve. The county district attorney filed multiple charges against Karen, including official misconduct, theft, and civil rights violations. Her law enforcement certification was permanently revoked, ensuring that she would never again have the authority to terrorize citizens in any jurisdiction. But the real victory was not Karen's downfall. It was the transformation of our community. Residents who had been living in fear of arbitrary harassment suddenly felt empowered to stand up for their rights. The city council passed new oversight measures requiring police to document and justify any extended investigations involving private property. A citizen review board was established to investigate complaints about police conduct. Mrs. Patterson put her holiday decorations back up in July, just because she could. Mr. Rodriguez started a neighborhood car restoration club that met in his driveway every Saturday morning. People who had been intimidated into silence were rediscovering the simple freedom of living their lives without fear of retaliation from corrupt authority figures. The media attention also brought unexpected benefits. A civil rights organization contacted me about filing a lawsuit against the county for Karen's violations of my constitutional rights. The settlement they negotiated covered all my expenses from the ordeal and established a fund to help other victims of police harassment pursue legal remedies. Elena Martinez, the tow truck operator who had helped me remove Karen's patrol car, became something of a local celebrity. She started getting calls from other communities where citizens were dealing with similar problems with corrupt officials who thought their positions made them above the law. "What you did took courage," she told me during a chance encounter at the grocery store. "Most people would have just accepted the harassment and tried to avoid making waves." 6 months later, I was still living on Maple Street, still parking in my own driveway, still enjoying the simple pleasures of a peaceful suburban life. But something fundamental had changed in our community. People understood that standing up to corruption was not just possible, it was necessary. The new sheriff assigned to our area was a professional who treated residents with respect and focused on actual police work instead of personal vendettas. Crime rates dropped because officers were spending their time on legitimate law enforcement instead of manufactured harassment campaigns. As I sat on my front porch on a quiet Sunday evening, watching kids ride their bikes and neighbors tend their gardens, I realized that sometimes the best way to restore peace is to fight for justice. Karen had taught me that lesson the hard way, but it was a lesson worth learning.